Okay, welcome to another episode of the Canucks Chatter podcast. I'm Rafal, that's Victor. Today we have a special guest, Harman Dayal. He's a Canucks NHL reporter for The Athletic, also a co-host at the Canucks Convo podcast show. Thanks for doing this, Harman.
Thanks for having me. Excited for this one.
So before we get into the Vancouver Canucks, I know that so you and Victor met each other in drop-in hockey, ball hockey here in Vancouver. What are your impressions of Victor as a player?
Only gone up against him a couple times because I usually play at other community centers.
Okay.
So I'll be honest, I haven't paid too close attention, but he seems pretty quick. Seems to be up in the play. Seems to be making things happen as a forward. That's my quick takeaway. Only been a couple times, so I'll have to keep an eye on him and maybe build a more comprehensive scouting report.
I gotcha.
I'm in the boat in the Horvat slot. That's my favorite spot.
Yeah, in front of the net. Yeah. Yeah, from what Victor tells me, you got some wheels, you got some strong legs running around. So we haven't crossed paths. I played there for years, but I guess just never played at the same time. Okay, let's talk about Vancouver here. If we're looking at the record, like it's pretty good. They're 21 points here, 9-5-3 in 17 games. Record-wise, they look pretty good. But there's been a lot of, I guess, inconsistencies in their game. Where do you see them so far in this season, and what do you think they need to sort of adapt and change moving forward?
Yeah, so there's two sides to the coin, right? One side of the coin, the more pessimistic side would be to say, well, they've had a really easy, soft schedule to this point. They've been beating up on a lot of bottom feeder teams. And when they've had to play more contender quality teams like New Jersey, like Carolina, like Edmonton, they haven't been able to really stack up convincingly. That'd be a major point right off the bat. That also, like their process hasn't always looked convincing. They haven't been able to string together a stretch of games where you could look at and go, they've been on their A game. They've consistently played a full 60 minutes without major lapses. You could point to their defensive play, how it hasn't been as sharp as it was last year, where especially from the second half onward, they were an elite defensive team. And there are other concerns, right? Elias Pettersson has been working his way out of his slump recently, but obviously, as far as the season as a whole, he hasn't really looked like himself. JT Miller has clearly been playing through something. He hasn't been as dominant as he was last year. The second pair, and the blue line specifically, stands out as the biggest concern with this team right now. So that would be the pessimistic side of the coin. The optimistic side of the coin, which also has merit, is you could look at all of those factors and say, well, all those things I just mentioned, look at how many of those things have gone wrong, and yet they've still got a record that would amount to a 101 point pace, comfortably get you in the playoffs. And you still don't have Thatcher Demko, which he'll hopefully be making a return soon. So once you can get healthier with him, get Besser back, and once Pettersson and Miller start playing closer to their potential, toss in a deadline acquisition on the back end or two, and all of a sudden, a lot of these holes and a lot of these question marks and concerns you get resolved really quickly. So I can understand both sides of the coin. Both sides have legit merit. I think what we're seeing right now is a team that should comfortably make the playoffs. It's just a matter of, okay, how high is their ceiling to actually do damage once they get into the postseason? I think right now the team that we're seeing isn't in a place where you'd look at them and go, they'd be a legit threat to go deep in the playoffs. But again, that's where a lot of things can change as far as Demko coming back, as far as potential deadline acquisitions to acquire defensemen. We're still so early into the season that you can't make any sweeping conclusions.
Yeah, that's the only thing they've been is consistently inconsistent in my books. And heading into the season, my biggest concern was that second pairing. That like no one could get the puck outside of that top one. How has Brandstrom looked in your eyes? Because I feel like when we got him, I like due to using him in NHL 24, he was a great, nice little solid player, and he's pretty much in my books, other than a couple periods here and there, he's deserved to be bumped up maybe a little bit higher in the lineup. Whereas Susie has really had his trouble so far.
Yeah, Brandstrom's been a revelation for this team. The speed and mobility that he has, is indispensable to the bottom four right now. The only challenge, and I agree with you that he deserves to slowly earn more rope, earn more ice time. The only challenge is that I don't think it fixes the second pair issues, right? And the reason I say that is because for as great as Brandstrom has been, you look at the matchup data, he's one of the most sheltered defensemen in the NHL, not just on this team, but you look at defensemen who've played at least 10 games this season, there are only a handful of them that, as far as the quality of the opponents that they're going up against, that have had an easier time than Brandstrom. And that tells you that the coaching staff is very carefully throwing him out there in situations where they know that he can succeed, mostly against third and fourth lines, as opposed to the flip side of that is the deployment that the second pair gets is they take on the toughest matchups on this team, tougher than the top pair with Quinn Hughes. The data bears that out, where if the Nashville game, for example, it was mostly the Susie Myers pair going up against Nashville's top line with Philip Forsberg on it, because they like to free up the Hughes pair to create offensively. So the only concern there is it's easier for us to look at Brandstrom's success in third pair role and Susie's tire fire of a start on the second pair and go, well, just bump Brandstrom up by one pair and that'll solve a lot of issues. The challenge is it's not really as simple of a transition as that. It's a colossal difference as far as the role that Susie is playing right now and the difference that Brandstrom is and the role that Brandstrom is playing right now. I think what you can maybe do is, even if you're not going to necessarily throw Brandstrom up to the second pair, start giving him more rope. The leash doesn't need to be as tight on him. Maybe he doesn't need to be as heavily sheltered. You can start to play him closer to 16, 17 minutes a night. And with the second pair as well, maybe they don't need to take on the toughest matchups on this blue line. Maybe you start to, not that the second pair needs to be sheltered necessarily, because I don't think the coaching staff will ever go to that extent, but maybe just
second pair.
Yeah, but maybe just reducing the difficulty of their matchups so that when Connor McDavid and the Oilers are coming in town, that you don't have Susie and Myers going up against them, for example.
Yeah, like if you take Hronek off that top line, you're pretty much paying Paul with Peter here and leaving Quinn to fend for himself almost, with whether it's Myers or Juleson. He's had small sample size to make Juleson look like a legit top six, who, even though Juleson is a solid NHL defenseman, I don't think he can play top pair. Or can't have Quinn just going out there every other shift, even though he already does that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna say, so staying on the back end here, I definitely agree when you look at the roster as a whole, you feel, in terms of at least the personnel, the forward group, like, it looks pretty good. You have some depth scoring. I think what you said, just maybe the top end players, Pettersson, JT Miller, they have to step up their game and in some cases get healthy. Goaltending, they have Demko, Lankinen's been it's been great for them so far. That back end is I think what worries a lot of fans and people looking at the team. In terms of picking up a top four defenseman, what would you say the type of defenseman they'd be looking for? Is it another, outside of Quinn Hughes and Brandstrom, not many, I guess, puck movers, but they also, with that second pairing, as you guys just talked about, having a tough time kind of playing a shutdown role. So do you think that they need to go out and maybe, whether it's now or closer to the trade deadline, pick up more of a shutdown top four defenseman or a puck mover, or maybe something like a hybrid? What do you think?
Puck moving is the first priority that comes to mind, but it has to be the type of puck mover that can hold up well enough defensively to where the coaching staff is going to be able to trust that defenseman to go up against top lines, because that second pair, that's been their job. Like, even in the playoffs, it was that Canucks second pair is going to play against the O'Reilly Forsberg line, is going to play against the McDavid line. So what that second pair really needs, why they've really struggled, the biggest issue that I see is they can't transition the puck out of their own zone. That it's just consistently rimming the pucks up the walls, which the opposing team's forecheck seems to anticipate and is able to pick off really easily. So yeah, some speed, some puck moving would definitely fix that side of it. But it also can't be a player that, let's say, moves the puck really well, but is a defensive liability, because they're just not going to be able to trust that type of defenseman in that type of difficult deployment and role. So, I mean, if you're looking for stylistically a player that could be the perfect fit would be a Rasmus Anderson type. But of course, that's going to cost an arm and a leg. He's not even a rental. So in Calgary's case, they may even decide to hold on to him for an extra year. Maybe they even want to re-sign him since he is relatively young to be part of their retooled to be one of the veteran leaders for the next core of the Flames. That's so he's what comes to mind is like stylistically he'd be the perfect fit, but I mean who knows if that's even a realistic possibility to get done.
Will it take like a DPD or an Atu Ratu or even a Tom Willander to be traded to get something like that? Like not necessarily Anderson, but someone higher quality. Like I think that'd be an overpay if they were to get Marcus Pettersson for him, because I don't think Pettersson's just is similar in vein to what they have already.
Yeah, I'd say usually with defensemen, especially if we're talking rentals, it involves a first round pick. Now you could swap out that first round pick for an equivalent prospect, or maybe teams would want to check in on Nils Höglander and see if he's a player that the Canucks might make available, depending on how Rick Tocchet views him. He's clearly been sliding in terms of his role in his minutes. But yeah, it's going to take that type of asset, whether it's a first round pick, an equivalent prospect. I don't think Aatu Ratu or DPD are high caliber enough prospects to be the centerpiece of a trade for a top four defenseman. Or a Nils Höglander type. I could see Höglander, given that he's already an established NHL player, scored 24 goals last year. I could see him being the type of piece that you could use to go and get a top four defenseman. But it also depends where term. It's always great to go after a defenseman with term, but I don't know how many of those defensemen are going to be realistically available. And the options are slim among rentals, to be totally honest with you. You mentioned Marcus Pettersson. He's a good player. He's a good top four defenseman. It's not the perfect stylistic fit because while he defends well and while he has a good first pass, he's not a dynamic puck mover. So even you look at some of the other options, whether it's Ivan Provorov or
Ivan Provorov in this market.
Cam Fowler doesn't really excite me, to be totally honest, coming out of Anaheim. There just aren't a lot of great options. So the Canucks might have to get creative here. You look at the way that they were able to acquire Filip Hronek. Hronek's a player that wasn't really on anybody's radar as far as being available. Of course, those opportunities can be unique and rare in terms of identifying defensemen in that age range and that ability that shake loose. But Canucks are going to have to get creative because it's not just that a lack of supply potentially, it's that the demand for top four defensemen among contending teams is going to be high. Edmonton needs top four help. A team like Dallas is going to be looking to round out their top four. When you look at their right side, which has Dumble, Lyubushkin, Lundqvist, like no real high-end righties, they're going to be looking for a top four righty. The Florida Panthers, after losing Brandon Montour in OEL, could be looking for top four reinforcements. The list just goes on and on. Every team could use another top four defenseman.
Alec Raymond in a second won't get it done anymore.
No, I won't.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams that, I mean, probably at least half the league that thinks that they're in the mix are going to look for a defenseman. I wanted to switch over to JT Miller. I think it was after last night's game. He was barely played the third period. Tocchet said that it was a decision. He went with a lineup that would help them try to get back in the game. When asked, he emphatically said if he's dealing with anything, he said no. I think from the eye test, it seems like something's going on there. Do you have any, thoughts on Miller if he's playing hurt or kind of what's going on with him? Because we know he can be, when he's healthy, he can be a huge difference maker on their team, and we just haven't seen that consistently this year.
He almost certainly is banged up, and to clarify, Tocchet wasn't saying that Miller hasn't been feeling the effects of any injury, more that the reason that Miller was benched was performance related rather than, he got hurt and wasn't healthy enough to play.
Right.
So I think that's a crucial distinction. That wasn't Tocchet necessarily throwing cold water on this idea that Miller's been banged up and playing through something. I think we can tell with how much time he missed in preseason him not taking faceoffs for a week early in the season, that he is clearly working through something. And you can just tell physically, right? When Miller's on top of his game, he's such a tenacious, brute, noticeable force, and he just hasn't been that player consistently. So, there's that element. There's not having Brock Besser. I think that's been massive, just the chemistry and familiarity that they've built up over the last few years, and not just what Besser does as a scorer, but even the small habits that Besser has away from the puck in the defensive zone, in the offensive zone as a forechecker to help the club retrieve pucks and ensure that they're spending time in the offensive zone and wearing teams down off the cycle. I think JT is really missing Brock for all of those reasons. And to top it all off, I mean, he's been struggling defensively, right? Let's make no bones about it. The shift at the end of the second period on the PK, it stands out to me as probably the reason why he was benched. It was, I mean, you could look at the pass across from Marchessault to Stamkos on that second Stamkos goal and say, well, that pass specifically wasn't JT's fault. But you look at the buildup for the play, and JT was sort of playing traffic cop, essentially, pointing out assignments for other guys to pick up, and meanwhile wasn't moving his own feet. And it's a big reason why Marchessault had so much time and space in the first place to go down the right half wall, make the initial pass into the bumper, and get to the point where he did eventually get the pass across to Stamkos for that goal. So he needs to step it up defensively, right? It's one thing if he's fighting it as far as his physical health, and maybe he's not as creative offensively, especially without Brock, but he can't let the bottom fall out of his play defensively. He's been getting scored on a lot at 5-on-5 recently. And that's one thing that with Pettersson, you want to know why he wasn't benched. It's because, you could point to him being completely ineffective offensively at times early in the season, but the bottom never fell out with him defensively. He was never a liability out there in his own end. And last game, it felt like that. The Saturday game against the Oilers, not this past Saturday, but the Saturday before that, was one of JT Miller's worst games as a Vancouver Canuck, with the number of turnovers. And during that game, the Oilers lit the Canucks up 3-0 during Miller's 5-on-5 minutes. So it's making sure that, okay, if you aren't on top of your game offensively, you at least got to have a baseline and a floor where he's not harming the team defensively.
He wasn't even playing with Hughes for most parts of Saturday's game. They were starting Petey out there, which usually doesn't happen very much. And that's, I feel like how I was saying, in my opinion, no one else is like, I felt like Petey might be going through some personal stuff, but hopefully not. But Miller is definitely going back towards a little bit of the Canadian division. Miller, we're getting some points and defensive liability. We're just missing a couple F-bombs from him.
No, I'm sure they've been there. I'm sure they've been there.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about we talked about the back end and kind of what they're missing. Do you think, because as we know, like their record is pretty good, but for a team that's got as many points as they do, they're -1 goal differential. Do you chalk that up just to their kind of record at home? That's been a struggle for them, or do you think that just lies in the in sort of the injuries and the defensive play?
It's a combination of those factors, right? I think it shows that their process hasn't been very good, right? It matches the eye test. I mean, just watching this team play, this hasn't looked like a team that should have a +10 goal differential, right? They've had some ugly performances. The one against New Jersey, 6-0. Even the one against the Islanders, 5-2. And honestly, that could have been even worse than a 5-2 scoreline, just based on how decisively the Isles were controlling that game. So I'm not too surprised that they have this -1 goal differential. The reason they've still been able to post a decent record is because they've racked up wins against some bottom feeder opponents. Which, look, you play the teams that are up on the schedule. Nobody's gonna there's still wins. You have to beat those teams, and sometimes contenders do struggle with putting away teams like San Jose and in Philadelphia and in Chicago. So you can't completely ignore those results, but I think that has been part of it. They've not been playing good hockey. That shows in their goal differential, but their overall record is still respectable and still has them on a playoff trajectory because they've at least they've found ways to win even when they haven't been playing their best. And part of that has been Lankinen playing well at times. Part of that has just been that on paper they're still, especially against some of these bottom feeders, they just overpower teams, right? Like I was on the California trip, and the game against Anaheim, for example, the Ducks just don't have the horses to match the Canucks.
Yeah. With the struggles of a couple of forwards so far, a bright spot, at least I liked it so far, is Jonathan Karamaki. I don't think he's been gripping the stick like how rookies do, and he's kind of taken the advice that just play your game, shoot the puck, get in the spots. He's looked good doing it. There's still a couple of times where he's been timid, and defensively he's been a little bit on and off, but I feel like he's starting to look like he might have a spot on here if he just keeps producing points.
It's a reason. It's been a decent start for him as far as first 4 games. Only 20 years old. Not a lot of experience playing professional games in North America, which is a different playing style than over in Sweden. But we'll see as far as how impactful can he be for the NHL lineup on a consistent basis, because he is still really light. The way I view his start is I'm looking at it and going, wow, the fact that he doesn't look out of place, that makes me really excited about what he could be at 21 years old, 22 years old, 23 years old. What it means for what he can do for this Canucks team this season, this playoffs, I still don't know. It's still too early to draw those types of conclusions. I will say defensively, given how young he is, given how light he is, that it is a positive sign that he hasn't stood out as far as turning a bunch of pucks over, being a clear liability. That's a promising sign. I think that reflects that his hockey IQ and the way that he reads the ice is already at an NHL level. We know that the shot is prolific, but it is going to take him time to really develop into a true top 6 forward. I still think. I'm not sure that we've seen the end of Lekkerimäki's time in the AHL. That he's up here with the team now. He's never gonna get sent back down, because there are still stretches where he's been quiet, right? Like the Nashville game. Not that he's playing poorly, but he's just not he's still so young and so raw that he's not going to be able to assertively drive play yet. He is still reliant on his line mates to get him the puck, and he's still learning to read off JT Miller, and that line still has struggled at times. So overall, it's been a promising start for him, especially as it pertains to his long-term upside and ceiling. But the jury's still out for me as far as how big of an impact can he make for the team this season.
Yeah. And outside of Quinn Hughes, I think who's a obvious pick to maybe be the most impactful player. Who, in your eyes, maybe it's someone they picked up during the offseason or someone playing further down the lineup that has sort of surprised you and made a big impact on this team so far?
I don't know if he's been a surprise necessarily or really is a shock in any way, but I will say Connor Garland's start has been terrific. I know he's been a little bit quieter over the last 2 or 3 games. I think he's one of those players that his form has started to tail off a little bit. But overall, especially through the first 14, 15 games, he was the driver of this team. His numbers at 5-on-5 were immaculate. He is 3rd on the team with 13 points in 17 games, despite not being a guy that really produces a lot at on the man advantage. He's driving the bus at even strength for them. There were times where you looked at him and went, he's been their best forward, especially through the first 10 to 15 games. His motor always runs. He's a dynamic playmaker, especially down low. He's just one of those players that wears his heart on his sleeve, is reliable defensively, and never takes a shift off, and can drag guys into the fight. When Petey was first struggling and they put Garland on his line, it helped Petey get to the point where at least that line was still putting up points here and there. And you could look at, okay, Pettersson's taking some baby steps now that he's starting to play with Garland. So I look at Garland as being one of the big drivers behind the team's record so far. And as far as more of a surprise, I think Kiefer Sherwood has exceeded everybody's expectations. What he's meant to the team, not only in terms of physicality, speed, and energy, but the secondary offense that he's producing now and looking pretty decent in a small sample size in a top 6 role, already up to 9 points in 17 games. He's probably been the most pleasant surprise among their forwards.
One last question here before we wrap it up here. After the Rangers game tomorrow, it's going to be a long Eastern sojourn for the team. Is a 500 record coming home after that road trip good enough, or will they need to win the road trip?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll say better than 500, just because I'm looking at the opponents that they're going to play. None of them are particularly good, right? Ottawa's sort of middle of the pack, fringe, wild card team. Boston's had a really tough start. Pittsburgh's a bottom feeder, and I know there's a back-to-back there, but those teams, none of those teams scare me. The Sabres aren't in a playoff spot. Red Wings haven't been very good. And then you got the Minnesota Wild. That's the only good team that the Canucks are going to play on this road trip. So for me, especially given how inconsistent they've been, you want to see them play better than 500. There's some road trips where you look at and go, given the quality of opponents, they've got multiple back-to-backs, let's say on this road trip. All right, a 500 road trip, you'll be happy with that coming home. But I don't see a lot of teams those teams on paper. None of them are better than the Canucks, right? Minnesota has had a better start than the Canucks, but you could still argue that at the very least the Canucks are on par with the Wild on paper. So to me, better than 500 should be the aim for that road trip.
Okay, perfect. One last thing, just an easy answer, or maybe hard depending on if you have an answer for it. But looking at outside the Vancouver Canucks, which team so far surprised you the most? I know there's probably a few candidates. Calgary's hot start. They've sort of came back down to earth now. But which team, either conference, has surprised you?
I'll go with Washington. I looked at the way that they squeaked into the playoffs, how felt like that a minus 100 goal differential or what it was, and somehow still made the postseason, aging roster. And I was thinking they're done now. I did like their offseason, right? I looked at their additions like Matt Roy and Jacob Chikrin, and okay, I don't love Pierre Dubois' contract, but okay, he gives them a legit top 6 center, which they don't have enough of. So it was a sort of balancing act where I really wasn't a fan of Washington at all last season. But okay, they could be in the mix for a wild card spot because I liked what they did in the summer. But I didn't see them getting off to this type of start where they've got a 12-4-1 record. And not just that they're off to that type of record, but the way that they're controlling play, their 5-on-5 analytics, this isn't like a lucky start for them. They're legitimately playing excellent hockey, and I thought they'd be in a boat where okay, it's the tail end of not only Ovi's career but the team's contention arc as a whole, and yet the Caps are back on the rise. Ovi's back on the rise. That's been a big surprise for me outside of Vancouver.
All right, yeah, and Connor McMichael, I think he's got 11 or 12 goals. That's it's definitely helping them. That's a surprise. All right, well, plug yourself here. Let us know where we can watch your podcast and see read your articles.
Yeah, Canucks Convo on YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those podcast platforms. And if you want to read my work, it's over at The Athletic.
All right, awesome. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
so much for doing
Let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, hopefully I'll catch you at one of the drop-in games here in the next few weeks if we both show up at the same time.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, awesome. Thanks. Again, we're on YouTube at the Canucks Chatter, also on X and Instagram. Follow us, give us a like, and till next time. Thanks for tuning in.